The blood-red sun painted the horizon as Virginia Wade teetered on the front porch of her family's homestead. The fever that had been building for days now raged through her body, making the distant mountains of Colorado Territory blur and swim before her eyes. It was 1876, and out here in Trinity, 30 miles from Denver, a woman alone had little chance of survival even in the best of times. Virginia pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, her golden hair damp with sweat as she struggled to remain upright. 3 months since her father had passed, and now this illness had struck her down like a lightning bolt from a clear sky. She'd been holding on, running the small cattle operation with grit and determination that had earned grudging respect from neighboring ranchers. But today her strength had finally abandoned her. As she swayed, ready to collapse, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats reached her ears. Through her fever-hazed vision, she made out a lone rider galloping toward her property, dust billowing behind him like a storm cloud. "Miss Wade." The deep voice called out as the stranger brought his horse to a skidding halt. Virginia recognized Garrett Zavala, the quiet cowboy who'd started working at the Morgan Ranch a few months back. Their encounters had been brief: a nod at the general store, a tip of his hat at Sunday service. "Mr. Zavala," she managed, her voice barely a whisper as the world tilted around her. "I fear I'm not quite myself today." She never felt herself fall, but suddenly strong arms were catching her, lifting her with surprising gentleness. Through her delirium, she was aware of his sun-bronzed face, concerned hazel eyes beneath the brim of a worn Stetson, and the scent of leather and prairie wind that clung to him. "You're burning up, Miss Wade," Garrett said, carrying her into the house with long, purposeful strides. His expression hardened with worry as he placed her carefully on her bed. "How long have you been sick?" "3 days, maybe 4. It's hard to remember," Virginia murmured, her eyes fluttering as consciousness began to slip away. "The cattle. Someone needs to." "Don't worry about the cattle. You need a doctor." His voice seemed to come from far away as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. The last thing Virginia heard before succumbing to the fever was Garrett's voice, steady and determined. "I'll get the doctor from town, but I'm coming right back. You hold on, Miss Wade." When Garrett returned with Dr. Maxwell hours later, the physician's examination confirmed his fears. "Mountain fever," the elderly doctor pronounced grimly, closing his battered medical bag. "Bad case, too. Been seeing it all through the county this season." Garrett paced the small bedroom, hat clutched in his hands. "She'll pull through, won't she?" The doctor's hesitation spoke volumes. "Some do, some don't. Next few days will tell. She needs constant care, cool compresses to bring down the fever, plenty of water when she's conscious enough to swallow. I've left medicine, but—" His voice trailed off as he glanced at the unconscious woman. "I understand," Garrett said quietly. Dr. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "You planning to stay? You're not family, son." Garrett looked at Virginia, her face flushed with fever, golden hair spread across the pillow. He'd noticed her from the moment he'd arrived in Trinity, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the whispers about a woman running a ranch alone. The kindness she showed to everyone regardless of station. He'd been working up the courage to properly introduce himself when he'd spotted her nearly collapsing on her porch while riding past. "Someone has to care for her," he said simply, "and see to her ranch." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll be back tomorrow if I can." "Weather's turning, though. Might be a storm coming." After the doctor departed, Garrett sat beside Virginia's bed, gently placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Her breathing was shallow, her cheeks flushed with an unnatural heat. "Miss Wade," he said softly, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Virginia, I know we barely know each other, but I'm not leaving you to face this alone." Through the long night, Virginia drifted in and out of consciousness. In her more lucid moments, she recognized the cowboy sitting vigilantly beside her bed, changing the compress on her forehead, helping her take small sips of water. "Why? Why are you helping me?" she whispered once, her voice cracked and dry. Garrett's eyes met hers, steady and honest. "Because it's what decent folks do." As dawn approached, Virginia's fever spiked dangerously. She thrashed in the bed, muttering incoherently, calling for her long-dead mother. Garrett held her hand, speaking soothingly, though fear gripped his heart as he watched her condition deteriorate. "You can't give up," he told her firmly. "Your ranch needs you. This town needs you." When the fever finally broke briefly near morning, Virginia opened her eyes, momentarily clear. "The cattle," she whispered. I'll see to them," Garrett promised. "You just focus on getting well." "You can't. Stay here forever," she protested weakly. His jaw set with determination as he gently tucked the blanket around her shoulders. "She was sick in bed and fading fast," he murmured, almost to himself, then looked directly into her eyes. "Then I'll be here till you wake." Virginia's eyes widened slightly at his words, a faint smile touching her lips before she drifted back into sleep. True to his word, Garrett divided his time between tending to Virginia and managing her small herd. He rode out at dawn to check the cattle, repaired the broken fence along the north pasture, and made sure the animals had water. By mid-morning, he'd returned to the house to care for Virginia, cooling her fevered brow, coaxing her to take sips of broth when she was conscious enough. Word spread quickly in Trinity. By the third day, neighboring women began stopping by with food and offers of help. Garrett accepted the meals gratefully, but politely declined most assistance, allowing only Martha Jenkins, the widow who ran the boarding house, to spell him for brief periods. "You're a good man, Garrett Zavala," Martha told him one afternoon as she prepared to leave. "Though folks are starting to talk." "Let them," he replied without hesitation. "My conscience is clear." The storm the doctor had predicted arrived with a vengeance on the fourth night. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the small house. Virginia's fever, which had temporarily receded, returned with renewed force. Garrett sat by her bedside, one hand holding hers, the other pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal. "Stay with me, Virginia," he murmured. "You're stronger than this sickness." As if in response to his words, her fingers tightened around his. Through the delirious haze of fever, Virginia could sometimes hear Garrett's voice, anchoring her to the world. She dreamed of riding across open plains with him, of sharing quiet evenings by the fire, of a future she hadn't dared to imagine for herself. Whether these visions were fever dreams or genuine yearnings, she couldn't tell. When she briefly regained consciousness during the storm, she found Garrett slumped in the chair beside her bed, finally overcome by exhaustion. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened. She noticed for the first time the dark circles beneath his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the way his strong hands, even in repose, seemed ready to offer help. "Thank you," she whispered, too quietly to wake him. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, Garrett left the house only to tend to necessary chores. He slept in the chair beside Virginia's bed, ate hasty meals at her small kitchen table, and read to her from the few books in the house, mostly practical guides to ranching, but also a well-worn volume of poetry that had belonged to her mother. On the morning the storm finally cleared, Dr. Maxwell managed to make it out to the ranch. His examination of Virginia was thorough, his expression guarded until he finally straightened up with a slight smile. "The fever's breaking," he announced. "She's turned the corner. Relief flooded through Garrett like a physical force. She'll recover. Barring complications, yes, she's a fighter, this one. The doctor glanced between Garrett and Virginia with knowing eyes. Though she'll need time to regain her strength. Weeks, maybe longer. I'll stay as long as needed, Garrett said immediately. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. I suspected as much. But son, he lowered his voice, drawing Garrett away from the bed, you ought to consider how this looks. A single man staying in an unmarried woman's home for so long. Garrett's jaw tightened. Her reputation means more to me than you know, doctor. I'll figure something out. After the doctor left, Garrett sat beside Virginia, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Her face had lost the alarming flush of fever, and her breathing was deeper, more regular. Good morning, she murmured suddenly, her eyes fluttering open. Good morning, he replied, unable to keep the smile from his face. The doctor says you're on the mend. Thanks to you. Her voice was weak but clearer than it had been. You saved my life, Garrett. Anyone would have done the same. Virginia shook her head slightly. No, they wouldn't have. She reached out with a trembling hand, and he took it without hesitation. Why did you stay? Truly. Garrett looked down at their joined hands. I suppose. Because from the moment I arrived in Trinity, I couldn't take my eyes off you. The way you carry yourself, the kindness in your eyes, your determination. He paused, suddenly self-conscious. I'm sorry. This isn't the time. Perhaps it's exactly the time, Virginia whispered. When you see death approaching, it has a way of clarifying what matters. The days that followed established a new rhythm. As Virginia's strength gradually returned, Garrett continued to manage the ranch, but now with her guidance. Each evening they would sit together as she went over the ledgers and shared her knowledge of the land and animals. My father taught me everything he knew, she explained one night as they sat at the kitchen table. He didn't have a son, so I became both daughter and heir to his knowledge. Garrett listened intently, impressed by her expertise. You run this place better than most men I've known run their spreads. Yet the bank still threatens foreclosure because they don't believe a woman can manage alone, Virginia said with a hint of bitterness. That's not right, Garrett said firmly. And it's not true. You've proven that. As Virginia continued to recover, whispers in town grew louder. Martha Jenkins warned them of the gossip one afternoon when she stopped by with a fresh loaf of bread. Reverend Cooper himself mentioned his concerns to me, she said, her kind face troubled. I defended you both, of course, but propriety matters in a place like Trinity, Virginia finished for her, sitting in a rocking chair on the porch. Though still weak, she'd insisted on getting out of bed that day. I've been thinking about that, Garrett said slowly. I could build a small shelter out by the barn, stay there instead. Nonsense, Martha interjected. With nights still cold. Besides, the talk would continue regardless. After Martha left, a heavy silence fell between them. Perhaps you should return to the Morgan Ranch, Virginia finally said, though the words seemed to cost her. You've done more than enough already. Garrett studied her face. Is that what you want? Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. No, Virginia admitted softly. But I won't be the reason your reputation suffers. Garrett laughed unexpectedly. My reputation? Virginia, I'm a cowhand who's worked his way across 3 territories. My concern is for you. Then we have a problem, she replied with a small smile, because my concern is for you. The solution came from an unexpected quarter. 2 days later, Reverend Cooper himself rode out to the ranch. The tall, austere man dismounted stiffly and approached the porch where Virginia sat wrapped in a quilt despite the spring sunshine. Miss Wade, he greeted formally. I see you're recovering. God has blessed you. He has indeed, Virginia replied carefully, as has Mr. Zavala's kindness. The Reverend's gaze shifted to Garrett, who had emerged from the barn. "Mr. Zavala, I'd like a word with both of you if I may." Inside, the Reverend declined offers of coffee or tea, preferring to address the matter directly. "I won't pretend not to know the situation," he began. "Your illness, Miss Wade, was grave. Mr. Zavala's assistance was providential. However, if you've come to suggest I leave, Reverend," Garrett interrupted, "I respect your position, but Virginia still needs help running this ranch while she recovers." The Reverend raised a hand. "Actually, I've come with a proposal." He straightened in his chair. "Mrs. Cooper has agreed to move in temporarily as a chaperone. This would allow Mr. Zavala to continue his assistance while preserving proprieties." Virginia and Garrett exchanged surprised glances. "That's very kind," Virginia said slowly, "but I wouldn't want to impose on Mrs. Cooper." "It was her suggestion," the Reverend replied. "She's always admired your determination, Miss Wade." After the Reverend departed with their tentative agreement to the arrangement, Virginia turned to Garrett with a mixture of relief and amusement. "Well, that's unexpected." Garrett nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "The whole town must be talking if the Reverend himself is arranging chaperones." Mrs. Cooper arrived the following day, a small valise in hand and a determined expression on her face. The Reverend's wife was a practical woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that belied her reputation for strict adherence to social norms. "Now then," she announced after settling into the small guest room, "I'm here to preserve appearances, not to interfere. You two carry on as you have been." With Mrs. Cooper's presence, a new normalcy established itself at the Wade Ranch. Virginia continued to regain her strength, gradually taking on more responsibilities. Garrett taught her techniques he'd learned from ranchers throughout the West, while she shared her father's innovative approaches to breeding hardier cattle. Each evening after supper, the three would sit on the porch if weather permitted, or by the fire if not. Mrs. Cooper would often excuse herself early, claiming fatigue but with a knowing twinkle in her eye. "She's not as subtle as she thinks," Virginia remarked one evening as they sat together watching the sunset after Mrs. Cooper had retired. Garrett chuckled. "I don't think subtlety is her aim." Virginia's health improved steadily as spring deepened. By early May, she could manage short rides around the property, though Garrett remained vigilant, never allowing her to overtire herself. "You're hovering, Mr. Zavala," she teased one afternoon as they inspected a new calf. "Just being cautious, Miss Wade," he replied with a smile. "Doctor's orders." Their relationship had developed a comfortable familiarity, yet beneath it ran a current neither had fully acknowledged. Their hands would brush when passing tools, their eyes would meet across the dinner table, and conversations would sometimes trail into charged silences. One evening, as they sat on the porch steps watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk, Virginia finally gave voice to what had been on her mind. "You never did finish telling me why you stayed," she said quietly. "That first night when I asked, you began to explain, but we were interrupted." Garrett was silent for a long moment. "I stayed because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving," he finally said, his voice low. "Because in the short time I'd known you, you'd come to matter to me in a way I couldn't explain." Virginia turned to face him, her blue eyes searching his. "And now?" "It's been weeks, Garrett. The bank note is due next month. I'm nearly recovered. You have no obligation to remain." "Is that what you think? That I'm here out of obligation?" He shook his head. "Virginia, the moment was broken by the sound of approaching riders. Both stood as three men on horseback pulled up to the house, moonlight glinting off the sheriff's badge worn by the lead rider. "Evening, Miss Wade, Mr. Zavala," Sheriff Coleman called, tipping his hat. "Sorry to disturb you so late. "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" Virginia asked, stepping forward. "Could be," the lawman replied grimly. "Had word that the Blackwell gang was spotted near Carson's Creek yesterday. Thought you should know, being out here alone." He paused, glancing between them. "Well, relatively alone. The Blackwell gang was notorious throughout the territory, ruthless outlaws who had robbed banks and trains from Texas to Montana. Their leader, Frank Blackwell, was rumored to have killed a dozen men. We appreciate the warning," Garrett said. "I'll keep watch." After the sheriff and his deputies departed, a tense silence fell. "They won't come here," Virginia said, though uncertainty tinged her voice. "There's nothing worth stealing at a small ranch." Garrett's expression was grave. "Let's hope they share that assessment." That night, despite Mrs. Cooper's presence in the house, Garrett slept on the porch, his rifle across his lap. The threat of the Blackwell gang hung over the ranch like a storm cloud in the days that followed. Virginia noticed Garrett checking and cleaning his guns each evening, his expression distant. One night after Mrs. Cooper had gone to bed, she confronted him. "You faced men like them before, haven't you?" Garrett hesitated before nodding. "In my younger days, I rode with a rough crowd. Not outlaws, but men who skirted the edge of the law. I've seen what men like Blackwell are capable of." "Is that why you came west?" Virginia asked softly. "To leave that life behind?" "Partly," he admitted. "I wanted to make an honest living, become someone worth respecting." His eyes met hers. "Someone worthy of a woman like you." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. "Garrett," Virginia began, but was interrupted by the sound of a horse whinnying in distress from the corral. Both rushed outside to find Virginia's mare pacing nervously. In the distance, the faint orange glow of fire was visible on the horizon. "That's the Carson place," Garrett said grimly. "Stay here with Mrs. Cooper. Lock the doors." "You can't go alone," Virginia protested. "I'm just going to see what's happening. I'll be back before dawn." His hand briefly touched her cheek. "I promise." After Garrett galloped away, Virginia paced the floor, too anxious to sleep. Mrs. Cooper joined her, and they kept a silent vigil by the window, watching the distant glow gradually diminish. When hoofbeats approached hours later, Virginia rushed to the door, relief flooding through her at the sight of Garrett returning safely. But her relief turned to concern when she saw his grim expression. "The Carsons?" she asked anxiously. "They're safe," he assured her. "They weren't home when it happened, but their barn is gone and half their cattle scattered." He dismounted wearily. "Sheriff thinks it was the Blackwell gang sending a message." "A message to whom?" "To everyone in the valley. Pay up when they come calling or face worse." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Sheriff's organizing a posse tomorrow." Virginia's heart sank. "And you're joining?" It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "I have to, Virginia." She wanted to protest, to ask him to stay, but she understood duty. Her father had taught her that. "Then you'll need rest," she said practically, though her voice trembled slightly. "And a proper breakfast before you go." The next morning, as Garrett prepared to leave, Virginia stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill. "Be careful," she said quietly. Garrett checked his saddle one last time, then turned to her. "Virginia, if I don't," she interrupted. "Don't say it." "You'll return." He stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. "Yes, I will. But before I go, I need you to know something." He took a deep breath. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, not because of the circumstances that brought us together, but because of you." Virginia felt tears prick her eyes. "Garrett, let me finish," he said gently. "I love you, Virginia Wade. I think I have since the first time I saw you in town, standing up to that cattle buyer who tried to cheat you." His smile was tender. "I should have said it sooner." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her softly. It was brief but filled with promise. "I'll come back to you," he whispered against her lips. Then he was mounting his horse and riding away, leaving Virginia standing on the porch, her fingers touching her lips where his had been. The posse was gone for 3 days. 3 days during which Virginia threw herself into ranch work, pushing the boundaries of her recovering strength. Anything to keep her mind from imagining Garrett facing down dangerous outlaws. Mrs. Cooper watched with concern. "You'll make yourself ill again," she warned. "I can't just sit and wait," Virginia replied, though she did concede to resting more frequently. On the evening of the 3rd day, as Virginia sat on the porch watching the road for any sign of riders, Mrs. Cooper joined her with 2 cups of tea. "You love him," the older woman observed without preamble. Virginia looked up, startled by the directness of the statement. After a moment she nodded. "Yes, I do." "Have you told him?" "Not in so many words. He told me before he left with the posse." Mrs. Cooper sipped her tea thoughtfully. "When Reverend Cooper asked me to come here, I expected to find a situation requiring my disapproval. Instead, I found something rather beautiful." She set her cup down. "Life is uncertain, my dear. The Reverend and I lost our son in the war. I learned that waiting for the right time often means waiting too long." Virginia pondered this wisdom as darkness fell. When she finally saw dust on the horizon, indicating approaching riders, she stood so quickly she nearly upset her tea. As the riders drew closer, she strained to make out Garrett's familiar silhouette. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest until at last she recognized him, riding alongside Sheriff Coleman. She didn't wait for him to reach the house but ran down the path to meet him. Garrett dismounted quickly, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "You're safe," she breathed, stopping just short of throwing herself into his arms, aware of the other men watching. "I promised I would return," he said, his voice husky with emotion. Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. "We'll be heading back to town, Zavala. Take a few days before reporting in." The lawman tipped his hat to Virginia. "Miss Wade." As the other riders continued toward town, Garrett led his horse toward the ranch, walking beside Virginia. "Did you find them?" she asked quietly. "Yes and no," he replied. "We tracked them to the territorial border, had a brief skirmish. 2 of their men were wounded, but Blackwell and the others escaped into Indian territory where we couldn't follow." He sighed, the weariness evident in his voice. "Sheriff thinks they won't be back any time soon, at least." When they reached the house, Mrs. Cooper tactfully made herself scarce, claiming she needed to finish some mending before bed. Alone on the porch, Garrett finally allowed himself to relax, the tension of the past days draining from his shoulders. "I was worried," Virginia admitted, sitting beside him on the steps. "So was I," he confessed. "Not about the gang, but about leaving you." He turned to face her. "Every mile away from you felt wrong." Virginia took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "You said something before you left, something I didn't get to respond to." Garrett's expression grew serious. "I meant it, Virginia, every word. I know you did." She moved closer to him. "And I love you too, Garrett Zavala. I think perhaps I began to fall in love with you when you stayed by my bedside, refusing to leave even when I was at my worst." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He pulled her gently into his arms, and this time when they kissed, there was no urgency of farewell, only the sweet promise of a future together. The following days brought a new harmony to the ranch. With the threat of the Blackwell gang receding, Virginia and Garrett focused on preparations for the upcoming cattle sale that would determine whether Virginia could meet the bank's payment. Working side by side, they mended fences, rounded up strays, and selected the best stock to take to market. Mrs. Cooper continued her chaperone duties, though her watchful eye had grown decidedly less vigilant. You know, Virginia remarked to Garrett one evening as they sat together on the porch, Mrs. Cooper hasn't objected once to us sitting out here alone after dark. Garrett chuckled. I believe she's become our strongest supporter. Virginia leaned her head against his shoulder. We'll need to figure something out soon. She can't stay here forever, and propriety matters, Garrett finished for her. He shifted to face her, taking both her hands in his. I've been thinking about that. Have you now? Virginia's eyes sparkled in the lamplight spilling from the window. I have. Garrett's expression grew serious. Virginia weighed. I came to Trinity looking for work, not expecting to find the other half of my soul. I don't have much to offer except hard work, loyalty, and a heart that belongs entirely to you. He squeezed her hands gently. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears welled in Virginia's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. The kiss they shared was tender, full of promise and shared dreams. The next morning they announced their engagement to a beaming Mrs. Cooper, who immediately began planning for a June wedding. The Reverend will be so pleased, she declared. He said from the beginning that this would end in either scandal or marriage. I'm delighted it's the latter. Word spread quickly through Trinity. Virginia was surprised by the genuine congratulations offered by townsfolk who stopped by the ranch or greeted them in town. Many had witnessed Garrett's devotion during her illness and approved of the match despite its unconventional beginnings. Martha Jenkins organized a small engagement celebration at her boarding house, attended by most of Trinity's residents. Even Mr. Morgan, Garrett's former employer, offered a gruff but sincere congratulation. Always knew Zavala was a good man, he told Virginia, just didn't expect him to be quite so impulsive. Virginia smiled. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head catches up. As the date for the cattle sale approached, Virginia grew increasingly anxious. The bank note loomed large, and even with the best animals selected for market, the outcome remained uncertain. What if we can't meet the payment? She asked Garrett one night as they reviewed the accounts. This ranch is all I have left of my father. Garrett's expression was determined. Then we'll find another way. We'll take out a loan against next year's herd if necessary. This ranch won't be lost, Virginia. I promise you that. The day before they were to drive the cattle to market, an unexpected visitor arrived. Thomas Harding, the bank manager from Trinity, rode up to the house in his smart buggy, looking uncomfortable and out of place on the working ranch. Miss Wade, he greeted formally as Virginia met him on the porch. Mr. Zavala. He nodded to Garrett, who had come from the corral upon seeing the banker's approach. Mr. Harding, Virginia replied cautiously. What brings you out this way? The banker cleared his throat. I've come about your loan, Miss Wade. Virginia's heart sank. The payment isn't due for another 2 weeks. We're taking cattle to market tomorrow. Yes, well, that's just it. Harding shifted awkwardly. The bank's owner, Mr. Peterson, has instructed me to offer you an extension. 6 months at the same interest rate. Virginia exchanged a startled glance with Garrett. That's unusually generous. Harding looked even more uncomfortable. Mr. Peterson was impressed by how you've managed since your father's passing, and he hesitated. The sheriff may have mentioned your role in the pursuit of the Blackwell gang, Mr. Zavala. It seems the gang robbed Mr. Peterson's bank in Denver last year. After the banker departed with the new agreement signed, Virginia turned to Garrett with a mixture of relief and confusion. I don't understand. The bank has been trying to foreclose for months. Garrett shrugged, though his eyes were thoughtful. Maybe your determination finally earned some respect, or maybe people in Trinity care more than you realized. With the immediate financial pressure eased, Virginia and Garrett were free to focus on their wedding plans. The ceremony was set for mid-June, to be held in Trinity's small church with Reverend Cooper officiating. As the day approached, Virginia found herself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought Garrett into her life. What if he hadn't been riding past that day? What if he hadn't seen her about to collapse? The thought of how differently things might have gone sent a shiver through her. "Second thoughts?" Garrett asked quietly, coming up behind her as she stood by the window one evening, lost in thought. Virginia turned with a smile. "Never. Just thinking about how close I came to losing everything, including the chance to know you." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "I believe some things are meant to be, Virginia. I was meant to find you that day." The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Cooper had finally returned to town the previous day, her chaperone duties officially complete. Martha Jenkins arrived early to help Virginia dress in her mother's wedding gown, which had been carefully preserved in a cedar chest. The ivory silk was yellowed with age but still beautiful, and Martha had skillfully altered it to fit Virginia's slender frame. "You look radiant," Martha declared as she arranged a crown of wildflowers in Virginia's golden hair. "Your parents would be so proud." Virginia blinked back tears. "I wish they could be here." "They are, in a way," Martha said gently. "In this dress, in this house they built, in the strength they gave you." At the church, it seemed all of Trinity had turned out for the occasion. Virginia rode in Mr. Morgan's buggy, which had been decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. When she entered the church on the arm of Sheriff Coleman, who had offered to escort her in her father's absence, she saw Garrett waiting at the altar, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new black suit. Their eyes met across the crowded church, and everything else faded away. Virginia barely heard the traditional words of the ceremony, focused instead on Garrett's steady gaze and the warmth of his hands holding hers. "I, Garrett, take you, Virginia, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice clear and unwavering. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." As Virginia repeated the vows, she remembered those fevered days when Garrett had stayed by her side, his promise echoing in her mind. "Then I'll be here till you wake." "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Cooper declared. "You may kiss your bride." Their first kiss as husband and wife was met with cheers and applause from the assembled townsfolk. The celebration continued at the Jenkins boarding house, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in Trinity. There was dancing to fiddle music in the yard, toasts with the finest whiskey from the saloon, and enough well wishes to last a lifetime. As evening approached, Virginia and Garrett slipped away from the festivities, riding back to their ranch, their home together. Standing on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant golds and crimsons, Garrett pulled Virginia into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zavala," he murmured against her hair. Virginia looked up at him, her heart full to bursting. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness," she confessed. "After my father died, I was just trying to survive. And now I'm looking forward to truly living." She reached up to touch his face. "With you." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other anew, their love expressed in tender touches and whispered promises. Virginia marveled at the strength and gentleness in Garrett's hands, the same hands that had cooled her fever and tended her cattle. In the quiet darkness afterward, lying in each other's arms, Virginia traced lazy patterns on Garrett's chest. "What are you thinking?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I was thinking about destiny," she replied softly. "How something as terrible as that fever led to something as wonderful as us." "I would have found my way to you eventually," Garrett said with quiet certainty. Even without the fever, some things are just meant to be. Virginia smiled against his shoulder, like a cowboy and a rancher's daughter. Exactly like that. The months that followed were filled with hard work and quiet joy. Together, they expanded the herd, implemented new breeding techniques Garrett had learned during his travels, and built a reputation for quality stock that commanded premium prices. When autumn came, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light across the prairie, Virginia received a letter from her cousin in Boston, her only remaining family, congratulating her on her marriage and expressing a desire to visit the following spring. "She'll hardly recognize this place," Virginia remarked as she and Garrett rode the property's boundary, surveying the improvements they'd made. The barn had been expanded, fences reinforced, and a new well dug closer to the house. "Or you," Garrett replied with a smile. "You're a far cry from the feverish woman I carried into the house that day." Virginia laughed. Thank goodness for that. As winter settled over Trinity, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a vast white expanse, Virginia and Garrett found new rhythms to their days. Evenings were spent by the fire, planning for the spring, reading together, or simply enjoying each other's company. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the hearth, Virginia presented Garrett with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It isn't much," she said shyly, "but I wanted you to have something special." Inside was a silver pocket watch engraved with his initials. "It was my father's," Virginia explained. "He would have wanted you to have it." Garrett ran his thumb over the smooth silver surface, deeply touched. "Virginia, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," she replied. "Just know that your family now, the only family I have." Garrett's expression grew soft. "Well, about that." He reached for her hand. "You might want to start thinking about expanding our family." "Come spring." Virginia's eyes widened. "Are you saying—" "Dr. Maxwell confirmed it yesterday," Garrett said, his voice gentle. "You're going to have a baby, Virginia, our baby." Joy unlike anything she had ever known flooded through her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she threw her arms around his neck. "A family of our own," she whispered. "Oh, Garrett." He held her close, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd be so fortunate," he admitted, "to find you, to build this life together, and now to become a father." As spring returned to Colorado territory, bringing new life to the land, Virginia's condition became increasingly apparent. The women of Trinity rallied around her, offering advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and support. Martha Jenkins became a particular ally, visiting frequently to check on Virginia and share her experience as a mother of 4. "You're carrying high," she observed during one visit. "Old wives' tale says that means a boy." Virginia smiled, her hands resting on her rounded abdomen. "Garrett says he doesn't care either way as long as the baby is healthy, but I think he secretly hopes for a son." "And you, the same," Virginia admitted. "Though I wouldn't mind a daughter to teach all the things my father taught me." As her time drew nearer, Garrett became increasingly protective, limiting her activities despite her protests that pregnancy wasn't an illness. "I'm just being cautious," he insisted after insisting she rest rather than help with the spring branding. "After coming so close to losing you once, I don't take chances with your health." Virginia relented, understanding his concern stemmed from love. "I'm stronger than you think," she reminded him gently, "but I'll rest for your peace of mind." Their child arrived on a warm June evening, almost exactly a year after their wedding. The labor was long but without complications, and as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, Virginia gave birth to a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival to the world with impressive volume. "He's perfect," Garrett whispered, cradling his son with awe after Dr. Maxwell had cleaned and swaddled the infant. "Virginia, look what we did." Virginia, exhausted but radiant, reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." They named him Thomas Grant Zavala, after Virginia's father and Garrett's grandfather. As news spread through Trinity, visitors arrived with gifts and congratulations, each welcomed warmly into the home that had become a center of hospitality under Virginia and Garrett's care. Sheriff Coleman, now a frequent dinner guest, pronounced the boy a fine addition to Trinity and presented him with a hand-carved wooden horse. "Never too early to start thinking about his first pony," the lawman declared with a wink. As summer progressed into autumn, Virginia found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey of the past year and a half. Sitting on the porch with Thomas sleeping in her arms, she watched Garrett working with the horses in the corral, his movements confident and strong. When he finished his work and joined her, she leaned against him contentedly. "You ever think about that first day?" she asked. "When you found me sick and brought me inside?" Garrett nodded, gently touching their son's dark hair. "Often. It was the day that changed everything." "I was so afraid," Virginia admitted. "Not just of dying, but of losing the ranch, of failing my father's legacy. And now," she smiled, looking out over their thriving property, "now I know that legacy isn't about land or cattle. It's about family, about love that endures." She looked up at him. "About finding someone who'll stay with you through the worst times, not just the best." Garrett pressed a kiss to her temple. "I made you a promise that day, Virginia, that I'd be there till you woke." He cradled her and their son in his arms. "But the truth is, it was I who woke to a life and love I never imagined possible." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and gold, Virginia Wade Zavala knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together: the cowboy who had refused to leave, the woman who had fought to live, and the child who represented their future. A future as vast and promising as the western horizon stretching before them.